Ethan Carter adjusted the straps of his survival pack as he made his way through the dense alien jungle, his boots sinking slightly into the soft, moss-covered ground. The air was thick with the scent of unfamiliar flora, the oversized leaves around him rustling with unseen life. Somewhere in the distance, the haunting call of a creature echoed through the humid atmosphere, but he paid it little mind. He had been on this planet for 3 days now, surveying its terrain, cataloging its wildlife, and mapping potential routes for further exploration. So far, nothing had posed a direct threat to him, at least not yet. The river ahead shimmered under the alien sun, its waters a deep, almost unnatural shade of blue. Ethan crouched near the edge, dipping his fingers in. The water was surprisingly cool, a contrast to the warmth of the air around him. He reached for his canteen, ready to refill it, when a sudden, violent splash shattered the quiet. His head snapped up, eyes scanning the water's surface. Something large was thrashing, struggling against the current. At first it was just a mass of sleek, spotted fur, barely distinguishable against the river's rapid movement. But as the creature turned, Ethan caught sight of piercing golden eyes, wide with panic. It wasn't just an animal fighting for its life. There was something aware behind those eyes. The creature clawed desperately at the water, its muscular body fighting against the force pulling it under. Its limbs, powerful and feline in structure, moved in frantic bursts, but exhaustion was setting in. The struggle was losing its intensity. It was drowning. Ethan didn't hesitate. He threw off his pack, ignoring the instinctive voice in the back of his mind warning him of the danger. The jungle was teeming with unknown predators, and this beast could very well be one of them. But he pushed the thought aside. Right now, it wasn't a predator. It was just something fighting to stay alive. The moment his body hit the water, the cold shock nearly knocked the breath out of him. He powered forward, swinging against the current, his eyes locked on the creature as it sank deeper. Kicking harder, he reached out, grasping for whatever he could find. His fingers brushed against thick, coarse fur. The moment he made contact, the creature convulsed, a deep, guttural growl escaping it despite the water rushing around them. It thrashed in panic, nearly knocking him back. "Easy," Ethan gasped, tightening his grip. "I'm trying to help you." The creature stilled for half a second, just long enough for Ethan to hook his arm around its midsection and kick hard toward the surface. It was heavier than he expected, its body dense with muscle. The current fought against them, threatening to drag them both down. For a terrifying moment, he thought he wouldn't be able to make it. Then, with one final, desperate push, they broke the surface. Ethan coughed violently, dragging in lungfuls of air. The creature let out a shuddering breath, its massive chest rising and falling against him. They weren't safe yet. The current was still pulling them downstream. With every ounce of strength left, Ethan swam toward the shore, dragging the half-conscious beast along with him. His feet finally found solid ground, and he staggered forward, pulling the creature out of the water before collapsing beside it. For several moments, the only sound was their shared ragged breathing. Ethan pushed himself up on one elbow, wiping the water from his eyes. His heart was still hammering in his chest. Slowly, he turned his gaze toward the creature he had just risked his life for. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. At first glance, it resembled an earth leopard, sleek, feline, its body built for agility and strength. But its fur shimmered strangely under the alien sunlight, as though tiny, iridescent patterns shifted just beneath the surface. Its ears were longer, more pointed than any terrestrial feline, and its paws bore retractable claws that looked almost metallic. Ethan's gaze drifted to its face. Angular, refined, intelligent. Those golden eyes, now half-lidded with exhaustion, locked onto his once more. Then, just as Ethan was about to convince himself this was just a strange but instinct-driven animal, the creature moved, not in fear, not in aggression, but deliberately. It tilted its head, not like a beast reacting to stimuli, but like someone trying to understand. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He had seen intelligence in animals before, problem-solving, adaptation, learned behavior. But this was different. There was something deliberate in the way it regarded him. Then, to his utter shock, the creature parted its lips. The sound that escaped was rough, broken, barely above a whisper. Why? Help. Ethan froze. This wasn't just an animal. This was something far more. And he had just pulled it from the brink of death. Ethan's breath hitched as he stared at the creature sprawled before him. The words it had uttered were barely audible, almost lost in the rustling of the jungle and the gentle lapping of the river behind them. His mind struggled to process what he had just heard. A wild animal, even an alien one, wasn't supposed to speak. It wasn't supposed to understand. Yet, this one had. The creature's golden eyes, though dulled with exhaustion, remained fixed on him. There was something in that gaze, something more than just base survival instinct. It wasn't fear or hostility. It was curiosity. It was awareness. Ethan swallowed hard, his pulse still racing from the adrenaline of the rescue. His body ached from the effort, his arms trembling slightly as he pushed himself to his knees. The jungle heat clung to him, beads of sweat mixing with the dampness of his soaked clothes. He needed to think. Slowly, carefully, he reached toward the creature, his fingers hovering just above its damp fur. It didn't flinch away. It didn't growl or bare its teeth. Instead, it simply washed him, its breathing slow and labored. "You spoke," Ethan murmured, half to himself. His own voice sounded foreign, as though his mind was still catching up with reality. "Did you? Can you understand me?" The creature blinked, its head barely moved, but the way its ears twitched made it seem like it was trying to respond. Ethan's fingers twitched, hovering over the strange, iridescent fur. Now that he was looking closer, he could see faint patterns shimmering across its body, runes, almost, glowing softly before fading again. He had never seen anything like it. This wasn't just an ordinary predator. It wasn't even just an alien animal. This thing was something else entirely. A deep, shuddering breath escaped the creature's throat, and its muscles tensed slightly as if in pain. Ethan noticed the deep gashes along its side, partially hidden by its damp fur. The wounds were jagged, not from the river. No, something else had done this. Something with claws or weapons. His instincts kicked in. Whatever had attacked it was still out there. Ethan straightened, his eyes scanning the surrounding jungle. The thick canopy cast strange, shifting shadows across the terrain. Every rustle of leaves, every distant cry of wildlife, suddenly felt more sinister. Something had wanted this creature dead. Something had hunted it. His grip tightened around the small multi-tool knife strapped to his belt, though he knew it wouldn't do much if a real threat emerged. He needed to get this thing, this being, somewhere safe. Turning back to the creature, Ethan reached toward his pack, pulling out a compact medical kit. The moment he popped it open, the creature let out a low, rumbling sound, a growl, but not one of aggression. More like skepticism, wariness. "Relax," Ethan muttered, pulling out a sterilizing wipe. "I'm just trying to help." The creature huffed softly, but it didn't move away. That was a good sign. Carefully, Ethan dabbed at the wound, watching as the alien blood, dark and almost ink-like, stained the cloth. The creature flinched slightly but didn't protest. It was strong, clearly in pain, but refusing to show it. "You're lucky I was nearby," Ethan said, shaking his head. "If I hadn't pulled you out, you'd be fish food by now." The creature let out a slow exhale, almost as if it understood the words but didn't quite know how to respond. Ethan worked quickly, cleaning the wound as best as he could before applying a bandage. The material adhered surprisingly well to the strange fur. He wasn't sure how effective human medical supplies would be on an alien physiology, but it was better than nothing. Satisfied with his work, he sat back on his heels, letting out a breath. The creature watched him in silence for a long moment. Then, without warning, It shifted, pushing itself up slightly. Ethan tensed, ready to back away if it decided to turn aggressive. But it didn't. Instead, it took a slow, deliberate step forward, closing the small space between them. Ethan barely had time to react before the creature lowered its head, resting its forehead gently against his arm. The gesture was brief, gone as quickly as it had come, but it sent a jolt of realization through him. This wasn't just an animal acknowledging kindness. This was something deeper, something intelligent, something grateful. A lump formed in Ethan's throat. He had spent years studying alien worlds, encountering creatures beyond imagination. But this was the first time he had felt a connection. The creature pulled back, its golden eyes locking onto his once more. And then, in a voice so quiet it was almost carried away by the wind, it spoke again. "You are not like the others." Ethan's breath hitched. The others? His mind raced, but before he could ask, a sound echoed through the jungle. A distant, metallic whirring. Not an animal, not the wind. Something was coming. And judging by the way the creature's ears flattened and its muscles tensed, it wasn't friendly. The jungle was alive with whispers, not the kind carried by the wind or the rustling of leaves, but something mechanical, unnatural. A distant hum, rhythmic and deliberate, vibrated through the thick foliage, setting Ethan's nerves on edge. His instincts screamed at him to move, to find cover, but he remained frozen, his senses straining to determine the source of the sound. The creature beside him, this strange, sentient leopard, had gone completely still. Its golden eyes had darkened, ears pinned back against its skull. Every muscle in its sleek, wounded body coiled with tension, as if preparing for a fight it knew was inevitable. Ethan adjusted his grip on his small blade, knowing it was practically useless if something truly dangerous was approaching. He had a sidearm in his pack, a low-caliber energy pistol meant for self-defense, but he doubted it would be much more than a distraction against whatever was out there. Then the jungle fell silent. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the suffocating kind. The unnatural void that meant something was hunting. Ethan's fingers twitched toward his pack, ready to grab his pistol, but before he could reach for it, the creature beside him let out a low, guttural sound. A warning. And then the shadows moved. From the dense foliage emerged figures, sleek and clad in dark, angular armor that seemed to blend into the environment. Their movements were precise, almost too fluid to be human. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as he counted at least 4 of them, each wielding strange, compact weapons that pulsed with a soft, eerie glow. These weren't just random hunters. They had come for the creature. And they had found it. One of the armored figures stepped forward, raising a hand in a silent command. The others stopped, their weapons trained on the Leopard-like being beside Ethan. The air between them was thick with unspoken tension, and for a brief moment, no one moved. Then the leader spoke, its voice distorted through a helmet translator. "Kael'Ryx, you should not have run." Ethan's pulse spiked. They knew its name. They had been hunting it. The creature, Kael'Ryx, let out a deep, rumbling growl, its body shifting slightly to place itself between Ethan and the approaching figures. The gesture wasn't lost on him. It was protecting him. The lead hunter tilted its head slightly, as if just now acknowledging Ethan's presence. "Human, this is not your concern. Step aside." Ethan could practically feel the weight of their stares drilling into him. His gut told him that if he moved, if he abandoned Kael'Ryx now, they wouldn't care about his existence. They would let him go. He wasn't the target. But his gut also told him something else. If he let them take Kael'Ryx, the creature was as good as dead. Ethan tightened his grip on his knife, though he knew it was foolish. What could he possibly do against trained, armored hunters with superior technology? And yet, as Kael'Ryx let out a low, barely audible growl beside him, something clicked in his mind. They were treating this like a formality, a routine capture, which meant they weren't expecting resistance. Ethan exhaled sharply. His mind raced. If he could just. Before he could make a move, Kael'Ryx did. With a sudden burst of energy that belied its injured state, the creature lunged, its powerful body colliding with the lead hunter. The impact sent them both crashing into the undergrowth, and chaos erupted. The remaining hunters reacted instantly, raising their weapons. Ethan's survival instincts took over, and he dove for his pack, fingers closing around the grip of his pistol, just as the first shot was fired. A bright pulse of energy crackled through the air, narrowly missing him as he rolled behind a thick tree trunk for cover. Kael'Ryx fought with a ferocity Ethan hadn't expected. Its movements were fast, too fast for something injured. Claws flashed, fangs snapped, and its strange, shifting fur made it hard to track its exact position. It was using the jungle to its advantage, weaving between the trees, striking with lethal precision before vanishing into the shadows. But there were too many of them. Ethan gritted his teeth, forcing himself to focus. He wasn't a soldier, but he knew how to shoot. Carefully, he leaned out from behind the tree, taking aim at one of the hunters. His finger pressed the trigger. A pulse of blue energy shot from his pistol, striking the hunter square in the shoulder. The impact wasn't enough to kill, but it staggered them. It was enough. Kael'Ryx seized the moment, using the brief distraction to pounce on the disoriented hunter, its claws slashing through armor. The hunter collapsed with a choked sound, their weapon falling from their grip. That was one down. But more were coming. Ethan barely had time to react before something heavy slammed into him from the side. He hit the ground hard, the pistol flying from his grip. A sharp metallic boot pressed down on his chest, pinning him in place. The lead hunter, wounded but still standing, loomed over him, weapon raised. Ethan's breath caught. This was it. Then something shifted in the air. The moment stretched, slowed. The jungle itself seemed to hum. And then, without warning, the hunter above him froze, not of their own will. Their entire body locked in place, weapon still aimed but unmoving. Their fingers trembled as if struggling against an invisible force. Ethan barely had time to process what was happening before he felt it. A strange, electric pressure pressing against the edges of his mind. It was inside his head, like a whisper that wasn't a sound but a presence. He turned his head and saw Kael'Ryx standing just beyond the fallen bodies of the hunters, its golden eyes glowing brighter than before. And then Ethan understood. Kael'Ryx wasn't just fast. It wasn't just strong. It was something more. And the hunters had just made a grave mistake. Ethan's breath came in short, shallow gasps as he stared at the frozen hunter above him. The soldier's body was locked in place, their weapons still aimed at his chest, but there was no movement, no breath, no sound, nothing. It was as if they had been trapped in some invisible vice, held in place by forces beyond their control. Then he felt it, the pressure inside his head. It wasn't painful, but it was there, like an unseen force brushing against the edges of his consciousness, whispering without words. A cold shiver ran down his spine as he turned his gaze toward Kael'Ryx. The alien feline stood still, muscles tense, golden eyes glowing unnaturally bright. The strange, shifting symbols on its fur pulsed, shimmering like liquid light. Something unseen radiated from the creature, something that bent the very air around it. Power. Ethan had no idea what he was witnessing, but one thing was clear. This wasn't just some rare, intelligent alien species. Kael'Ryx had abilities far beyond anything he had ever encountered. The remaining hunters reacted quickly. One of them barked something in a language Ethan didn't understand, and the others immediately adjusted their stance. They weren't panicking. They had seen this before. They had been prepared for it. A sharp, high-pitched click filled the air. Ethan barely had time to register it before a pulse of energy erupted from one of the hunter's gauntlets. Kael'Ryx let out a sharp, strangled sound. Its body convulsed as if it had been hit by an unseen force, its glowing eyes dimming. The hunter closest to Ethan suddenly broke free from their invisible restraint, stumbling backward with a cough. Whatever power Kael'Ryx had been using, it had just been disrupted. Ethan didn't waste time. The second the lead hunter moved, he lunged forward, grabbing a fallen weapon from the ground. It was heavier than his pistol, its shape unfamiliar, but his instincts kicked in. He had no idea how to use the alien tech properly, but there was a trigger, and that was enough. With a snap, a burst of blue-white energy discharged from the weapon, colliding with the nearest hunter's chest plate. They staggered back, armor sizzling, but didn't go down. Kael'Ryx recovered fast. With a guttural snarl, it lunged forward again, its claws slicing through another hunter's gauntlet. Sparks flew as alien metal was torn apart, the weapon inside short-circuiting instantly. But the remaining soldiers weren't going down easily. They fought with brutal efficiency, their movements crisp and precise, as if trained for this very encounter. They weren't just hunters. They were operatives, and that meant they wouldn't stop. Ethan could see it in the way they moved, in the way they adjusted their strategy instantly. Their original plan had been capture, not kill. But now, that was changing. Now, they were aiming to eliminate the threat. Kael'Ryx was that threat. But Ethan, to them, he was collateral damage. He fired again, another wild burst that barely grazed one of the advancing soldiers. His movements were slower than theirs, sloppier. They knew how to fight. He was just trying to survive. "We have to go," he shouted, not even sure if Kael'Ryx could understand him. But the alien Leopard didn't need to be told twice. Its injured body still moved with fluid grace, and in an instant, it was beside him, its powerful form low to the ground, muscles coiled like a spring ready to explode. Then, with a surprising amount of strength, Kael'Ryx shoved Ethan toward the trees. Ethan barely kept his footing as he stumbled into the thick undergrowth, his brain catching up with what had just happened. Kael'Ryx wasn't just protecting itself, it was protecting him. And that meant one thing. This wasn't just about survival anymore. They were in this together. The moment they hit the tree line, Kael'Ryx moved faster than Ethan thought possible. Despite its injuries, it navigated the dense jungle with an almost unnatural ease, its body weaving through the foliage like a shadow. Ethan, on the other hand, was struggling to keep up. Branches slapped against his arms and legs, his breathing was ragged, and his heart pounded in his chest. The only thing keeping him going was pure adrenaline, and the knowledge that slowing down meant death. Behind them, the hunters were relentless. They moved fast, almost inhumanly so, their armor adapting to the terrain with ease. Ethan could hear them closing in, their weapons humming as they prepared for another shot. Kael'Ryx suddenly veered left, into a narrow ravine, its massive form disappearing into the darkness below. Ethan didn't hesitate. He leaped after it, tumbling down the embankment, his body hitting damp soil with a harsh thud. His entire body screamed in protest, but there was no time for pain. Kael'Ryx was already on its feet, waiting for him. And then it spoke. Not in a whisper, not in pain, but in urgency. "They will not stop. Not until I am dead." Ethan wiped sweat from his brow, trying to catch his breath. "Then tell me." He exhaled, gripping the alien weapon tighter. "Why are they after you? What do they want?" Kael'Ryx hesitated, its glowing eyes flickering with something unreadable. Then, finally, it answered. "Because I am not supposed to exist." Ethan's stomach dropped. The weight of those words hit him like a freight train. Whatever Kael'Ryx was, it was something powerful, something dangerous, something worth killing for. And now he was caught in the middle of it. The jungle pressed in around them, thick with moisture and the scent of damp earth. Every breath Ethan took felt heavy, his lungs burning from exertion. His boots dug into the uneven ground as he ran, dodging roots and low-hanging branches, but no matter how fast he moved, he could hear them. The hunters were closing in. Kael'Ryx moved ahead of him, its sleek, feline body cutting through the undergrowth like a phantom. The alien's injuries should have slowed it down, but it barely faltered, its movements sharp and deliberate. It knew these lands. It wasn't just running. It was leading them somewhere. Ethan had no choice but to follow. Behind them, bursts of energy lit up the darkness. Weapons fire. The blasts seared through the trees, scorching bark, sending leaves and dirt flying. Ethan gritted his teeth as one shot struck the ground near his foot, nearly throwing him off balance. "Keep moving." Kael'Ryx growled, its voice more commanding now. Urgent. Ethan didn't need to be told twice. The jungle terrain shifted as they reached an area of uneven rock formations. A deep ravine loomed ahead, jagged cliffs plunging into darkness below. Ethan skidded to a stop just before the edge, his heart pounding. There was no bridge, no way across, just a sheer drop into the abyss. "Kael, there's nowhere to go," he panted, turning to the alien. But Kael'Ryx wasn't looking at him. Instead, the creature's gaze locked onto something beyond the ravine, a crumbling, vine-covered structure, half hidden by the jungle. Ethan barely had time to process it before Kael'Ryx stepped back, muscles tensing, and then leaped. The alien's powerful body soared through the air, claws extended as it latched onto a thick, twisting vine hanging from the other side. It didn't even hesitate. It climbed swiftly, pulling itself up with practiced ease before turning back toward Ethan. "Jump," Kael'Ryx called, its voice sharp. Ethan's stomach twisted. Jump. Over a death drop. Behind him, the sound of approaching footsteps grew louder. He had seconds to decide. He clenched his fists. There was no time to doubt. Ethan ran for the edge and launched himself into the air. For a terrifying moment, he was weightless, the ground far below threatening to swallow him whole. His hand stretched toward the vine, just as gravity took hold. His fingers brushed against the thick rope of plant life. And he caught it. But his grip faltered. His arms strained as the sudden jolt nearly ripped him loose. "Hold on," Kael'Ryx snarled. Ethan's fingers burned as he clenched the vine tighter, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He could hear the hunters on the other side now, their voices barking orders, their weapons humming to life. They weren't going to let him escape. Kael'Ryx extended a clawed paw, reaching for him. With one last desperate heave, Ethan swung himself up, his boots scraping against the rocky wall. Kael'Ryx grabbed his forearm in a vice grip, pulling him the rest of the way. They collapsed onto the ancient stone structure together, panting. A pulse of energy sizzled past them, missing by inches. The hunters weren't stopping. Kael'Ryx let out a sharp snarl and turned toward the ruins. Inside. Now. Ethan didn't argue. They sprinted into the dark passageway of the ruins just as another energy blast scorched the entrance behind them. Inside, the air was cooler, thick with the scent of age and damp moss. Faint, glowing symbols decorated the walls, the same shifting symbols that shimmered across Kael'Ryx's fur. Ethan barely had time to register it before Kael'Ryx spoke again, urgency lacing every word. "They won't stop hunting me, Ethan. Not until I'm dead." Ethan turned to him, his mind racing. "Why? What are you?" Kael'Ryx hesitated. The golden glow in its eyes flickered. Then it spoke. "I am the last of the gifted." The word sent a chill through Ethan's spine. Before he could ask what that meant, a sound echoed through the ruins, the unmistakable whirring of drones. The hunters weren't just waiting outside. They were coming in. Kael'Ryx turned sharply. "We need to reach my ship. Now." Ethan's heart pounded. They had survived this long. But the real fight, it was just beginning. The air inside the ruins was thick with dust and the scent of ancient stone. The dim, shifting glow of the strange symbols on the walls cast flickering shadows that danced with every movement. Ethan barely had time to register the eerie beauty of the place. The hunters were coming. Kael'Ryx moved swiftly ahead, navigating the darkened corridors with purpose. Despite its injuries, the alien Leopard still moved like a predator, silent, controlled, dangerous. Ethan followed close behind, gripping the alien weapon he had stolen from one of the hunters, though he had little idea how to properly use it. His breath was still ragged from the escape, his muscles aching, but adrenaline pushed him forward. Then, from behind them, the sound of mechanical movement echoed through the narrow passage. A sharp, high-pitched hum filled the air. Drones. Ethan barely had time to react before the first attack came. A pulse of red-hot energy slammed into the wall beside him, blasting chunks of stone outward. He ducked on instinct, throwing himself against the side of the corridor, just as another shot fired, narrowly missing his head. Kael'Ryx let out a warning growl, its fur bristling. It moved fast, darting ahead toward an open chamber. Ethan had no choice but to follow. They emerged into a vast underground hall, lined with towering pillars covered in glowing alien script. The air felt charged, like a storm was about to break. Ethan barely had a moment to take it all in before Kael'Ryx spun toward him. "There's an exit ahead, but they won't let us reach it." The alien's voice was steady, but there was a hardness to it now, a readiness for battle. Ethan tightened his grip on the stolen weapon. "Then we fight." A metallic screech filled the air as 2 hunter drones swooped into the chamber, their sleek black forms hovering in midair, targeting systems locking on. Ethan fired first. The alien weapon kicked hard, merely wrenching from his grip as a pulse of energy shot forward, striking one of the drones. Sparks erupted, and the machine wobbled in the air. But it wasn't down yet. The second drone retaliated. A thin red beam lanced toward Ethan, forcing him to throw himself behind one of the massive stone pillars. The impact scorched the air where he had been standing just seconds before. Kael'Ryx moved like lightning, launching itself into the air. It landed on top of the first drone, claws piercing through its armored plating. A horrific screeching noise filled the chamber as Kael'Ryx ripped through the drone's core, sending it crashing to the ground in a shower of sparks. The second drone adjusted its aim, shifting its attack toward Kael'Ryx. Ethan didn't hesitate. He stepped out from cover and fired again. This time, the shot was more controlled, more precise. The pulse of energy slammed into the drone's sensory module, blinding it. It veered wildly, colliding with one of the massive pillars. Kael'Ryx was on it in an instant. With one final, brutal swipe, the drone's casing was torn apart, and it dropped to the ground, lifeless. Ethan let out a sharp breath, his pulse still racing. "Tell me that was the last of them." Kael'Ryx didn't answer. Instead, the alien's ears flattened, its eyes narrowing. A moment later, Ethan heard it too. Footsteps. Not the fast, erratic steps of drones, the heavy, methodical march of soldiers. The hunters had arrived. A voice echoed through the chamber, distorted through a translator. "You cannot escape, Kael'Ryx." Ethan turned toward the sound, his grip tightening around the weapon. The lead hunter stepped into view, flanked by 2 more armored figures. Their sleek black armor gleamed under the dim glow of the ruins, their weapons humming with restrained power. Kael'Ryx took a slow step forward, placing itself between Ethan and the hunters. Its tail flicked once, muscles taut beneath its shimmering fur. The lead hunter tilted their head slightly. "You should have died in the river." Kael'Ryx let out a slow, deliberate exhale. "You're afraid." The hunter didn't flinch, but Ethan swore he saw the smallest shift in their stance. Kael'Ryx's golden eyes gleamed. "You know what I am. You know what I can become. That's why you're here. You fear the gifted. You fear me." The hunter's grip on their weapon tightened. "Your kind are a threat to balance. If you live, the war begins again." Ethan's stomach twisted at the weight of those words. This wasn't just a simple hunt. This was something bigger. Kael'Ryx's gaze never wavered. "The war never ended. You just kept killing us until there were none left to fight back." The hunter took a step forward. "Then allow us to finish what we started." And then the chamber exploded into chaos. The hunters opened fire. Kael'Ryx moved first, its body twisting midair as it narrowly dodged the barrage of energy blasts. Ethan dove for cover, returning fire with rapid, desperate shots. A blast struck the pillar behind him, sending chunks of stone raining down. He rolled forward, landing just feet away from one of the hunters. They turned their weapon on him, too slow. Ethan slammed the stolen rifle into their gut, then fired point-blank. The hunter went down hard. Kael'Ryx was a storm of movement, dodging and weaving, its claws slicing through armor like paper. One of the hunters tried to get a clear shot, but Kael'Ryx whipped its powerful tail, sending the soldier crashing into a wall. Ethan took out a second hunter with a well-placed shot, the recoil of the alien weapon nearly numbing his fingers. They were winning. Until the lead hunter pulled a device from their belt and activated it. A pulse of blue light washed over the chamber. Kael'Ryx staggered. The alien let out a choked snarl, its body suddenly locking up. The glow in its eyes flickered violently, its muscles trembling. Ethan turned in horror. What's happening? The lead hunter stepped forward, triumphant. Enough games. The suppression field is active. Your powers are useless now. Kael'Ryx let out a ragged breath, its legs buckling. Ethan's mind raced. This was bad. This was really bad. The hunter raised their weapon, aiming directly at Kael'Ryx's head. It ends here. Ethan moved before he could think. With every ounce of strength he had, he grabbed the nearest fallen weapon and fired. The blast struck the suppression device, shattering it in a burst of electricity. The energy field collapsed instantly. Kael'Ryx's body tensed, then surged. The glow in its golden eyes exploded into brilliance. The very air around them shook. The lead hunter barely had time to react before Kael'Ryx unleashed its full power. A pulse of raw force erupted from the alien Leopard, sending the hunter flying backward. The walls trembled. The pillars cracked. The entire ruin shook as if the planet itself had come alive. Kael'Ryx turned to Ethan, its eyes blazing. We end this. Now. And then, with one final, thunderous roar, the fight truly began. The ruins trembled beneath their feet, stone fragments falling from the high, domed ceiling as the raw energy of Kael'Ryx's unleashed power surged through the air. The lead hunter, who had been so sure of their victory moments ago, now scrambled to regain footing. The suppression field was gone. Kael'Ryx was no longer bound. Ethan felt the very air around him shift, like the jungle itself was holding its breath. Kael'Ryx's golden eyes blazed, the strange symbols on its fur burning with an inner light. The hunters staggered to their feet, their weapons still clutched tightly in their hands, but there was hesitation now, a split second of doubt. Kael'Ryx did not hesitate. The alien feline moved with unnatural speed, closing the distance in a blur of motion. Before the hunter could fire, Kael'Ryx struck. A pulse of energy rippled outward from its form, a force so intense that the very air seemed to warp around it. The hunter was lifted from the ground, frozen mid-air, limbs locked in place as if gravity had abandoned them. Their helmeted face twisted in silent agony, their body convulsing as Kael'Ryx's power held them like a vice. Ethan watched in awe, and maybe a little fear. This wasn't just strength. This was something beyond physical limits. Kael'Ryx took a slow, deliberate step forward, its head tilting slightly. The hunter, still suspended in the air, struggled, their fingers twitching against the grip of their weapon, but they were powerless now. Then, Kael'Ryx spoke, its voice like a whisper carried by the wind, yet full of an ancient weight. You should have let me drown. With a single flick of its tail, the hunter was hurled backward with bone-shattering force. They slammed into the far wall of the ruins, a sickening crack echoing through the chamber before their body crumpled to the ground, motionless. Silence. Then, from deeper within the ruins, a low hum began to vibrate through the stone walls. Kael'Ryx turned sharply, its glowing eyes narrowing. They triggered something. We need to move. Ethan barely had time to process what had just happened before a deep, grinding noise echoed from above. The ruins were collapsing. Kael'Ryx grabbed Ethan by the arm, not roughly, but firmly. "The exit is close. Stay with me." Ethan didn't argue. He ran. The walls shook as massive stone pillars cracked and crumbled, dust filling the air in thick clouds. Behind them, the remaining hunters, those who could still move, were also scrambling to escape. Their leader was gone, their advantage lost. They knew they couldn't win now. But Ethan wasn't thinking about them anymore. He was thinking about Kael'Ryx's ship. If they could reach it, if it was still intact, they had a chance. They sprinted through the ruins, dodging falling debris, the ground shaking beneath their feet. Kael'Ryx led the way with inhuman agility, barely missing collapsing chunks of stone. Ethan was less graceful. Twice, he nearly tripped, his lungs burning, his legs screaming in protest. But he pushed forward, driven by the singular need to get out alive. Then finally, they emerged. The jungle opened up into a clearing, and there, sitting half-buried beneath thick alien vines and foliage, was Kael'Ryx's ship. Ethan felt a surge of relief. It was real. It wasn't just some desperate hope. It was right there. Kael'Ryx didn't slow. The alien sprinted forward, bounding toward the ship's hull, claws scraping against the metal. The ship, though damaged, still held its shape, a sleek, dark craft that gleamed under the pale alien sun. Kael'Ryx reached the side hatch, pressing a paw against the interface panel. The symbols on its fur pulsed, and with a soft hiss, the door slid open. "Get inside." Ethan wasted no time. He leaped up into the craft, Kael'Ryx right behind him. The moment they were both inside, the hatch sealed with a heavy clank. The ship's interior was dark, the control panels flickering weakly with dim, pulsating lights. Kael'Ryx moved swiftly toward the command console, its claws tapping over the controls. The ship rumbled beneath them, engines struggling to wake from dormancy. Ethan wiped sweat from his forehead, chest rising and falling as he caught his breath. "Tell me you can get this thing off the ground." Kael'Ryx didn't look at him, its focus entirely on the controls. "If it has enough power left, yes." Outside, the remaining hunters had reached the clearing. Ethan could see them through the narrow viewport. They were raising their weapons. A warning alarm flashed red across the control panel. The ship's shielding was down. "They're gonna fire," Ethan shouted. Kael'Ryx's ears flattened. "Then we leave. Now." With a deep mechanical roar, the ship's engines ignited. The jungle floor trembled as a blast of energy erupted from the thrusters, sending dirt and debris flying in every direction. The hunters fired desperately, their shots pinging harmlessly against the ship's reinforced plating. Then, the ship lifted off. Ethan pressed himself against the seat, the force of acceleration nearly knocking the breath from his lungs. Kael'Ryx's claws gripped the controls with practiced precision, guiding the craft upward, breaking through the thick jungle canopy. As they climbed higher, Ethan watched as the clearing below grew smaller and smaller, until the hunters were nothing but tiny figures left behind on the ground. For the first time since this entire nightmare had begun, they were safe. The ship broke through the atmosphere, leaving behind the jungle, the ruins, the planet itself. Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Kael'Ryx exhaled as well, its powerful body relaxing slightly for the first time. For a moment, there was only the quiet hum of the ship, the vast expanse of space stretching endlessly before them. Ethan turned to Kael'Ryx, his voice hoarse but steady. "So, where to now?" Kael'Ryx glanced at him, a strange, almost knowing expression in its golden eyes. Then it spoke. "Wherever the fight takes us." And with that, the ship jumped to hyperspace,